He thought he was winning, posting lavish photos from a five-star spa with his mistress on his arm. He pictured his heavily pregnant ex-wife Chloe, alone, heartbroken, and scrolling through his perfect life. But he made one mistake. He forgot to check the background of his own photos. While he was sipping champagne in a fluffy robe, Chloe was also in the air, not crying in coach, but flying first class, seated next to billionaire CEO Sebastian Davenport. And Sebastian wasn't just offering her a tissue, he was offering her a future her ex could never have imagined. This isn't a story about revenge, it's about an upgrade. Chloe Sterling believed in the architecture of a perfect life. It was a belief she had cultivated over 32 years, one built on the solid foundations of a privileged upbringing, an art history degree from a prestigious university, and a marriage that from the outside looked as immaculate as the minimalist Los Angeles home she shared with her husband, Marcus Thorne. Their life was a carefully curated Instagram feed of success and happiness. Weekend trips to Napa charity galas, where their smiles gleamed under the flash of cameras, and cozy Sunday mornings with their golden retriever, Winston. Marcus was a man carved from ambition. He had that sharp, predatory charm that often masquerades as charisma in the world of tech startups. His company, Innovate, was his first love, a demanding and all-consuming partner that promised to revolutionize the digital marketing space. Chloe had been his steadfast supporter, the graceful, intelligent wife who hosted flawless dinner parties for potential investors and edited his late-night emails until the words sang with an eloquence he himself didn't possess. She was the silent, uncredited co-founder of the man he had become. Now, at 7 months pregnant, Chloe felt the familiar structure of her life beginning to shift. The impending arrival of their son, a tiny human she already loved with a fierce, primal intensity, was supposed to be the final beautiful addition to their perfect picture. Instead, it felt like a fault line, a subtle tremor beneath the polished marble floors of their existence. The distance between them had grown insidiously. It started with small things. Marcus, who once couldn't fall asleep without his hand resting on her stomach, now worked late into the night, often sleeping in the guest room to avoid waking her with his pre-dawn calls. Their conversations, once filled with shared dreams and intimate jokes, had become logistical, revolving around his schedule, his stress, his monumental climb to the top. "It's just until the Series B funding closes, Angel," he'd say, his voice a low, tired hum as he kissed the top of her head, his eyes already on his phone. "Everything I'm doing for us, for him." Chloe wanted to believe him. She clung to the memory of the man she had married, the passionate, attentive man who had once quoted poetry to her in a rain-soaked Parisian park. But lately, his reassurances felt hollow, like echoes in the cavernous space that had opened up between them. The scent of an unfamiliar, cloyingly sweet perfume clung to his suits some evenings, a scent he'd dismiss as probably from someone at the office. His phone, once left carelessly on the kitchen counter, was now perpetually in his pocket, angled away from her, a digital fortress she couldn't breach. The loneliness was a physical ache, a constant companion in their sprawling, silent house. She'd spend hours in the nursery. She had meticulously designed a serene space of soft greys and blues, rocking in the glider and talking to her unborn son. She told him about the father she hoped Marcus would be the father he once was. She was trying to convince herself as much as the baby. The breaking point, though she didn't know it at the time, came on a Tuesday morning. The air was thick with the scent of blooming jasmine from their perfectly manicured garden. Chloe was making breakfast, a wave of nausea cresting over her, when Marcus walked into the kitchen, already dressed in a crisp, dark suit. He was radiating an almost manic energy, a stark contrast to her own sluggish, pregnant fatigue. "Morning, Angel," he said, bypassing her for the espresso machine. "Big day." "Bigger than usual?" she asked, trying to keep her tone light. "Massive," he confirmed, not turning around. I have to fly out this morning. A last-minute meeting with some investors in New York. This could be it, Chloe. The final push. A cold dread seeped into Chloe's bones, colder than the marble countertop beneath her hands. New York. When were you going to tell me? Just found out late last night. Didn't want to wake you, he said finally, turning to face her. He attempted a smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. They were distant, opaque. It's just for a couple of days. 3 at the most. I'll be back before you even miss me. The lie was so blatant, so poorly constructed, it was almost an insult. Marcus was a meticulous planner. A last-minute international business trip was as likely as him suddenly deciding to become a monk. Every instinct screamed that something was wrong. Marcus, she began, her voice trembling slightly. My final prenatal class is on Thursday. You promised you'd come. We're practicing breathing techniques. He sighed, a sound of pure, unadulterated annoyance. It was a sound she had been hearing more and more often. Chloe, this is a multi-million-dollar deal. I think we can afford to miss one breathing class. Just record it or something. I have to do this. For us. There it was again. For us. The justification for every absence, every broken promise, every lonely night. He used those 2 words like a shield, deflecting any of her needs or concerns. She looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time in what felt like months. The man standing before her was a stranger in a familiar suit. His eyes, which used to hold her with such warmth, now seemed to look right through her. He was already gone. He had left her long before this phantom trip to New York. Okay, she said, her voice quiet, defeated. She couldn't summon the energy to fight. The baby inside her kicked a small, insistent reminder of what was truly important. Okay, Marcus, be safe. He walked over and gave her a perfunctory kiss on the cheek. His lips were cool, his touch fleeting. I'll call you from the airport, he promised. Chloe knew he wouldn't. She watched from the window as his Uber pulled away, a sleek black car disappearing down their palm-lined street. The house fell silent again, but this time the silence was different. It wasn't just empty, it was heavy with unspoken truths and the bitter taste of betrayal. She wrapped her arms around her belly, a protective gesture. It was her and the baby now. They were a team. Later that day, a package arrived. It was a ridiculously expensive, state-of-the-art baby monitor, the kind with biometric sensors and a live feed to your phone. A gift from Marcus ordered online. A text message pinged on her phone a moment later. Marcus, for the little man. See, always thinking of you both. The gesture, meant to be placating, felt like a slap in the face. He couldn't be there to hold her hand during a breathing class, but he could buy a gadget to monitor their child from a distance. He was outsourcing his presence, automating his role as a father and a husband. Chloe stared at the box, at the smiling, perfect family on the packaging. It was a caricature of the life she thought she was building. Her own perfect life was a gilded cage, and she was finally beginning to see the bars. And she was realizing with a terrifying clarity that the door had been left wide open. The first 24 hours after Marcus left were a study in hollow routines. Chloe moved through her immaculate home like a ghost, the silence amplifying her anxieties. She attended her prenatal yoga class, the instructor's soothing words about breathing through discomfort, feeling like a cruel joke. She made a healthy dinner. She couldn't eat the taste of betrayal, curdling her appetite. She tried to read, but the words blurred into meaningless symbols. Every ping of her phone sent a jolt of false hope through her system, but it was never him. The promised call from the airport never came. By the second day, a quiet rage began to smolder beneath her grief. It was the anger of a woman who had poured her soul into a partnership only to suspect she had been watering a plastic plant. She had trusted him, implicitly, defended his absences to concerned friends, and sublimated her own needs for the sake of his ambition. For what? so he could lie to her face about a multi-million-dollar deal in New York. Her sister Amelia called that afternoon. Amelia was a sharp, no-nonsense lawyer in San Francisco, and she had never been Marcus's biggest fan. She saw the ambition in him, not as drive, but as a runaway train. "So, how's Captain Industry?" Amelia asked, her voice laced with its usual skepticism. "He's in New York," Chloe said the words, tasting like ash. "A last-minute business trip." There was a pause on the other end of the line. Amelia could read Chloe's silences better than anyone. "A last-minute trip to New York. The week of your final Lamaze class. Right. He said it was important," Chloe said, her voice small. "And you believed him." Chloe didn't answer. The silence was her confession. "Chloe," Amelia said, her tone softening. "Are you okay?" "I don't know what I am," she whispered, a single tear finally escaping and tracing a hot path down her cheek. "Listen to me," Amelia said, her voice firm again. "You're coming up here for Mom's birthday this weekend. I already booked your flight. First class so you and my nephew can be comfortable. It's non-negotiable. You need to get out of that house." The thought of escaping, of being with her family, was a lifeline. "Okay," Chloe agreed, a wave of relief washing over her. "Okay, I'll come." It was that evening that the world fell apart. Chloe was aimlessly scrolling through Instagram, a masochistic habit of looking at other people's perfect lives while hers was imploding. She wasn't following Marcus. He claimed social media was a distraction. But she did follow a few of his junior employees, young, hungry tech bros who documented their lives with a relentless fervor. And that's when she saw it. A young man named Josh Miller, one of Marcus's coders, had posted a story. It was a group photo, tagged with a location, the Serenity Peak Resort and Spa, Aspen, Colorado. Not New York. Aspen. For a moment, Chloe's brain refused to process the information. It was a mistake, a coincidence. But then she zoomed in, and there, in the background, unmistakable, even in the slightly blurry shot, was Marcus. He was laughing, his head thrown back, a champagne flute in his hand. He wasn't wearing a suit. He was in a plush white robe, the resort's logo embroidered on the chest, and his arm was wrapped tightly around a woman. It wasn't a colleague. It wasn't a potential investor. The woman was leaning into him, her head resting on his shoulder, her hand possessively on his chest. She was stunning in a way that felt like a personal attack. Long, dark hair, a perfect figure, barely concealed by her own white robe, and a smug, self-satisfied smile. Chloe recognized her instantly. Isabella Rossi, a brand strategist who had been consulting for Innovate for the past 6 months. The woman whose cloyingly sweet perfume had been clinging to Marcus's clothes. The digital dagger twisted. Chloe's fingers, numb and clumsy, tapped on Isabella's tagged profile. It was public, and it was a horror show. The latest post from only an hour ago was a close-up. 2 champagne flutes clinking together. The caption read, "Celebrating a successful merger. Aspen, # getaway, #love." In the reflection of one of the glasses, she could see Marcus's face smiling at Isabella. Chloe felt the air leave her lungs. It wasn't just an affair. It was a whole other life. A parallel narrative he had been constructing while she was at home picking out paint colors for their son's nursery. The Series B funding, the late-night calls, the stress. It was all a lie, a meticulously crafted alibi for a sordid tryst at a luxury spa. She swiped through Isabella's feed, each photo a fresh wave of nausea. Pictures of them, hiking their faces flushed and happy. A shot of 2 pairs of ski boots outside a chalet door. A selfie of Isabella in a bikini in a steaming outdoor hot tub. The snowy mountains in the background. She was living a honeymoon fantasy with another woman's husband. But the final soul-crushing blow was a photo Isabella had posted to her story. It was of Marcus, asleep in a massive, opulent bed, the morning light streaming in. He looked peaceful, content. The caption was a single word, mine. Chloe dropped her phone as if it had burned her. A guttural sob escaped her, a sound of such profound pain it barely sounded human. The perfect life she had built, the future she had envisioned, it all shattered, in that one moment, the shards slicing into her heart. He wasn't just cheating on her, he was flaunting it. He was humiliating her, secure in the belief that she was safely at home, naive and unsuspecting. The rage that had been smouldering now erupted into a wildfire. The grief was still there, a vast black ocean of it, but now it was fueled by a burning righteous fury. How dare he? How dare he do this to her, to their unborn child? Her phone buzzed again. A text from Marcus. Marcus, hey Angel, NY is exhausting, all business, missing you like crazy. How's my little guy? The audacity of it, the sheer breathtaking hypocrisy was almost comical. Chloe stared at the message, her vision blurring with tears of anger. She didn't reply. She would never reply to that man again. Instead, she stood up, her movements stiff and deliberate. She walked into their shared bedroom, the room where he had lied to her for months, and pulled her suitcase from the top of the closet. She didn't pack frantically. Her actions were calm, methodical. She packed for herself and for her son. She packed the soft, tiny clothes she had so lovingly folded. She packed the ultrasound photos, the tangible proof of the life they had created, a life he had so casually discarded. She walked past the expensive baby monitor still in its box, a monument to his hollow gestures. She left her wedding and engagement rings on top of it, the diamonds catching the light, suddenly looking cold and foreign. They were props from a play where she had been the unwitting fool. As she walked out the door, she didn't look back. The gilded cage was no longer her home. It was just a house filled with expensive furniture and cheap lies. Her sister's words echoed in her mind. It's non-negotiable. She was right. Leaving wasn't just a choice. It was a necessity. Her flight to San Francisco wasn't just an escape anymore. It was the first step into a new, unknown, and terrifyingly uncertain future. But it would be a future built on truth, not on the beautifully curated lies of Marcus Thorne. The fluorescent lights of LAX felt harsh and unforgiving, mirroring the raw, exposed state of Chloe's emotions. Every smiling couple she saw sent a fresh pang of anguish through her. Every advertisement for a romantic getaway felt like a personal taunt. She moved through the security line in a daze, her body on autopilot, while her mind endlessly replayed the images from Isabella's Instagram feed. Marcus's laugh, Isabella's smug smile, the two of them wrapped in a cocoon of betrayal. She felt a deep, chilling shame, as if his infidelity were a stain on her own character. Had she been that naive? That blind? The questions circled relentlessly vultures in her mind. She clutched her carry-on bag, her knuckles white, her gaze fixed on the floor. She just had to get to the gate. Boarding the plane offered a small reprieve. The quiet, hushed atmosphere of the first-class cabin was a world away from the chaotic terminal. A flight attendant with a warm smile greeted her by name and guided her to her seat, a spacious pod that promised privacy and comfort. Chloe sank into the plush leather, the sheer luxury of it all, feeling dissonant with her inner turmoil. Amelia had insisted on it, and for the first time, Chloe understood why it wasn't about the luxury. It was about having a small, protected space in which to be broken. She stowed her bag, buckled her seatbelt, and immediately turned to stare out the window, hoping to create an impenetrable wall around herself. She didn't want to talk. She didn't want to make eye contact. She just wanted to be invisible, to shrink into herself until she reached San Francisco. "Excuse me, I think you're in my seat." The voice was deep calm and unexpectedly close. Chloe flinched, startled out of her reverie. She turned ready to offer a mumbled apology, and her breath caught in her throat. The man standing in the aisle was not what she expected. He was tall, with a lean, athletic build that his impeccably tailored charcoal suit couldn't conceal. His hair was a dark, rich brown, with a few distinguished flecks of silver at the temples, and his eyes, a startlingly clear shade of blue, were looking at her with an expression of gentle amusement, not annoyance. There was an aura of quiet authority about him, an unforced confidence that was utterly different from Marcus's brash, performative swagger. "Oh," Chloe stammered, fumbling for her boarding pass. "I'm so sorry. I'm in 2A. I just—" He glanced at her ticket, and then at the seat number next to her. "And I'm in 2B. It seems we're neighbors. I was just making a bad joke. My apologies." He offered a small, disarming smile. "I saw your boarding pass. I'm Sebastian Davenport." The name registered with a jolt. Sebastian Davenport. Even in her self-imposed exile from Marcus's world, she knew that name. He was the CEO of Davenport Industries, a massive multinational conglomerate with interests in sustainable technology and ethical investments. He was a titan of industry, but a different kind of titan from the ones in Marcus's orbit. Davenport was known for his integrity, his philanthropic work, and his almost mythical aversion to the public eye. He was the kind of man Marcus aspired to be, but lacked the substance to become. "Chloe," she managed to say, feeling a flush of embarrassment. "Chloe Sterling. A pleasure to meet you, Chloe," he said, his voice smooth and low. He settled into his seat with an easy grace, giving her a wide berth, as if sensing her fragility. He didn't try to force a conversation. Instead, he simply opened his briefcase and pulled out a thick, leather-bound book. The flight attendant came by, offering pre-departure beverages. "Champagne, Mr. Davenport?" she asked brightly. "Just sparkling water for me, thank you, Catherine," he replied, his smile easy and familiar. "Mrs. Sterling." The word "Mrs." was a fresh stab. "Just water for me too, please," Chloe whispered. As the plane began its taxi to the runway, Chloe clutched the armrests, a wave of anxiety washing over her. The turbulence of the takeoff felt like a physical manifestation of her life's sudden violent upheaval. She closed her eyes, trying to focus on the breathing techniques she was supposed to have practiced with Marcus. A single traitorous tear slipped out from beneath her eyelid. She hastily wiped it away, mortified that this powerful, sophisticated man next to her might see her crying. "Takeoff can be unsettling," a quiet voice said beside her. She opened her eyes to see Sebastian Davenport looking at her, not with pity, but with a simple, kind understanding. He wasn't looking at her tear-streaked face, but at her white-knuckled grip on the armrest. "It's not usually," she admitted, her voice thick. "It's just been a long day." "I understand," he said simply. He didn't press. He didn't ask questions. He just acknowledged her distress, a small act of grace that felt monumental. He then returned to his book, granting her the space she so desperately needed. As the plane leveled out at cruising altitude, the cabin settled into a peaceful hum. Chloe tried to distract herself with the in-flight entertainment system, but her mind was too turbulent. She found herself surreptitiously glancing at the man beside her. He was completely absorbed in his book, his brow furrowed in concentration. He was nothing like Marcus, who couldn't sit still for 5 minutes without checking his phone, his mind always jumping to the next deal, the next angle. Sebastian possessed a stillness, a centeredness that was both intimidating and deeply calming. Feeling a sudden sharp kick from within, Chloe gasped softly and placed a hand on her belly. Sebastian looked up from his book, his blue eyes softening as they fell on her hand. "Everything all right?" Chloe nodded, a faint, genuine smile touching her lips for the first time that day. "He's just saying hello. He seems to like flying." A warm, genuine smile transformed Sebastian's face, erasing the serious corporate lines. "A future pilot, perhaps? How far along are you, if you don't mind me asking?" "7 months," she said. "My sister has 2 boys. She said the 3rd trimester was a mix of complete exhaustion and incredible anticipation." He said, his tone conversational and warm. That's a very accurate description, Chloe found herself saying, a small laugh escaping her. It felt foreign, like an old language she was just now remembering. For a few minutes, they talked about parenthood, his joy at being an uncle, her hopes and fears for her son. The conversation was easy, effortless. He didn't talk about himself or his business. He asked her questions, listened intently to her answers, and made her feel for the first time in a long time seen. He was so profoundly different from Marcus. Marcus saw her pregnancy as another project to be managed, another box to be checked on the list of a successful life. Sebastian seemed to see it as a miracle. As the flight attendant came to take their meal orders, Chloe realized she was actually hungry. The knot of anxiety in her stomach had loosened, replaced by a tentative calm. She ordered the salmon, and when it arrived, she ate every bite. Their conversation flowed throughout the meal. They talked about books, art, and travel. He spoke of his philanthropic work in Africa, with a quiet passion that was deeply moving. She spoke of her love for art history, a passion she had set aside to support Marcus's career. Sebastian listened as if her opinions were the most fascinating things he had ever heard. "So you're Chloe Sterling," he said thoughtfully, at one point, looking at her with a new, appraising light. "You're married to Marcus Thorne of Innovate." Chloe's nascent calm instantly evaporated. The blood drained from her face. Yes, that's right." Sebastian's expression was unreadable, but there was a flicker of something in his eyes, recognition, perhaps something more. "I've been following his company's trajectory," he said, his tone carefully neutral. "He's made quite a name for himself." Chloe didn't know what to say. The name Marcus had made for himself was now in her mind inextricably linked to lies and infidelity. She simply nodded, unable to form words. Sensing her immediate distress, Sebastian deftly changed the subject. "My apologies," he said smoothly. "Shop talk is dreadfully boring. Tell me more about the pre-Raphaelites. You mentioned you wrote your thesis on them." The gesture was so kind, so perceptive, it almost made her want to cry again, but this time for a different reason. He had seen her wall go up and had immediately backed away, prioritizing her comfort over his own curiosity. Marcus would have pushed, prodded, seeing the conversation only through the lens of how it could benefit him. As the plane began its descent into San Francisco, a comfortable silence settled between them. It wasn't the heavy, anxious silence she shared with Marcus, but a peaceful, easy quiet. As they gathered their belongings, Sebastian handed her a simple, elegant business card. "Chloe," he said, his voice sincere, "it was a genuine pleasure meeting you. If you ever find yourself in need of anything, a conversation, a contact in the city, anything at all, please don't hesitate to call." "Thank you, Sebastian," she said, her voice filled with a gratitude that felt too large for words. "For everything." As she walked off the plane and into the bustling terminal, she saw Amelia waiting for her, her face a mixture of worry and relief. Chloe hugged her sister tightly, the solidness of her embrace a welcome anchor. Over Amelia's shoulder, she saw Sebastian Davenport one last time. He was met by a driver holding a sign, but before he turned to go, he caught her eye and gave her a small, encouraging nod. For the first time since she saw that devastating photo, Chloe felt a tiny, fragile flicker of hope. She had stepped onto the plane, a broken woman, her world in ruins. She was stepping off of it, with the phone number of a billionaire in her pocket. Yes, but more importantly, with the memory of a simple human connection that had reminded her of her own worth. The flight had been more than just a journey from one city to another. It felt like a passage from one chapter of her life to the next. While Chloe was finding an unexpected moment of grace at 30,000 feet, Marcus Thorne was living his fantasy. The crisp mountain air, the opulent suite at the Serenity Peak Resort, and the adoring gaze of Isabella Rossi were all part of the life he felt he deserved. He was a conqueror, and this was his spoil of war. "Isn't this incredible?" Isabella purred, snuggling closer to him as they sat by the suite's grand fireplace. glasses of expensive whiskey in hand. So much better than another boring board meeting. I told you I'd take care of you, Marcus said, his voice slick with self-satisfaction. He took a sip of his whiskey, the smoky flavor a perfect complement to his mood. He felt powerful, untethered, and brilliant. He had masterfully arranged this escape, creating a bulletproof alibi that left Chloe none the wiser. He pictured her at home, dutifully attending her prenatal classes, a perfect, predictable wife holding down the fort while he closed the deal of a lifetime. The irony made him feel even more clever. But even in paradise, reality has a way of intruding. His phone buzzed incessantly. Emails from his team, questions about financials, urgent requests for decisions. He had delegated as much as possible, but his company was a machine that required his constant attention. Just turn it off, Isabella complained, tracing a finger down his chest. We're supposed to be escaping all of that. I can't, Izzy, he sighed, pulling away slightly to type a rapid-fire response. This is what pays for all of this. Isabella's pout was perfectly executed, a practiced expression of alluring disappointment. She was beautiful, exciting, and ambitious qualities he admired. She understood his world, or so he thought. But her understanding was shallow. She saw the perks of his success, the money, the access, the thrill, but she had no patience for the relentless grind that produced it. Unlike Chloe, who had painstakingly proofread his business plans and offered insightful critiques, Isabella's eyes glazed over whenever he tried to discuss the nuances of his work. Her support was for the lifestyle, not the labor. A subtle tension began to thread its way through their idyllic getaway. He found her constant need for social media documentation grating. Every meal, every view, every moment had to be captured, filtered, and posted. It felt performative and cheap. Do you have to post that? He asked, an edge to his voice as she angled her phone to get the perfect selfie of them in the hot tub. Of course I want everyone to see how amazing this is, she said, oblivious to his irritation. Don't you? He didn't. The whole point of his elaborate lie was secrecy. While he had been careful to stay out of the foreground of most of her pictures, the constant broadcasting made him nervous. It was a digital trail of breadcrumbs he couldn't control. The merger she had so cleverly alluded to in her Instagram caption was another point of friction. She had begun talking about their future as if it were a settled deal. She dropped hints about being a co-founder, about wanting a more official role at Innovate, about the kind of house they would buy together once he handled the Chloe situation. Once the funding is secure and I've eased Chloe through the next few months, we can start making real plans, he'd say, a vague, non-committal promise. But the truth was, Marcus hadn't thought that far ahead. Leaving Chloe, especially with a baby on the way, was a messy, complicated affair. It would be a PR nightmare for the carefully crafted image of the family man CEO he sometimes projected to more conservative investors. Isabella was his escape, his thrill. He hadn't yet considered the possibility of her becoming his reality. The fantasy was perfect. The logistics were a nightmare he preferred to ignore. The cracks in their perfect aspen bubble were beginning to show. It was built on a foundation as unstable as his own lies. San Francisco, a budding connection. Chloe, meanwhile, was breathing. For the first time in months, she was taking full, deep breaths of the cool, fog-tinged San Francisco air. Being with her mother and Amelia was like wrapping herself in a warm, protective blanket. They didn't push her to talk. They simply created a space for her to be feeding her, making her tea, and surrounding her with an uncomplicated, unconditional love that stood in stark contrast to Marcus's transactional affection. She told them everything. She showed them Isabella's Instagram page, the words tumbling out of her in a torrent of anger and heartbreak. Amelia's face was a mask of cold warmth. I'm going to ruin him, Amelia said, her voice dangerously quiet. I'm going to find a litigator who will tear him to shreds. No, Chloe said, surprising both her sister and herself. Not yet. I need to think. I need to figure out what I want, not what you want for me. For the first time, Chloe was thinking about her own needs. Her entire adult life had been centered around Marcus's ambition. Now, with that structure gone, she was left with a terrifying but exhilarating freedom. Who was she without him? What did she want for herself and her son? A few days later, still nestled in the sanctuary of her family's home, she found herself thinking about Sebastian Davenport. His kindness on the plane had been a small light in a vast darkness. On an impulse, she took out his business card. Her finger hovered over the number. What would she even say? It felt absurd, but the memory of his genuine interest, the way he had listened to her talk about art, sparked a flicker of her old self. She didn't call. Instead, she sent a brief, formal email. Subject: Thank you, dear Miss Davenport. I just wanted to thank you again for your kindness on the flight to San Francisco. It was very much appreciated during a difficult time. I particularly enjoyed our conversation about art. Sincerely, Chloe Sterling. She hit send before she could second-guess herself. It was a small act of reaching out, of re-engaging with a world beyond her pain. She didn't expect a reply. He replied within the hour. Subject: Re. Thank you, Chloe. Please call me Sebastian. The pleasure was all mine. I've been thinking about our conversation as well. It's not often I get to discuss the Rossettis with anyone. I hope San Francisco is treating you well. If you have any free time this week, there's a small but fascinating exhibition of early photography at the SF Suomi I think you might enjoy. I'd be honored if you'd allow me to accompany you. No pressure at all, of course. The offer is there if you're interested. Best, Sebastian. Chloe's heart did a little flutter. It wasn't a pity invitation. It was a thoughtful, specific suggestion based on their shared interests. It was a date. The idea was both terrifying and thrilling. Was she ready? Amelia, reading the email over her shoulder, had no such reservations. You are going, she declared. It is the perfect antidote to that narcissistic parasite you married. And so she went. She met him in the soaring, light-filled atrium of the museum. He was dressed in casual chinos and a soft cashmere sweater, looking even more handsome and relaxed than he had on the plane. There was no awkwardness. He greeted her with a warm smile and a light touch on her arm, guiding her toward the exhibit. As they walked through the quiet galleries, something magical happened. Chloe felt herself transforming back into the person she had been before Marcus, passionate, insightful, and intelligent. She spoke about the nuances of light and shadow in the photographs, about the historical context, about the emotional impact of the images. Sebastian listened, captivated. He asked smart questions, offered his own perspectives, and treated her as an intellectual equal. It was intoxicating. For years, her world had been reduced to the size of Marcus's ego. Now it was expanding again, filled with art ideas and intelligent conversation. After the exhibit, they sat in the museum's cafe sipping coffee. The conversation drifted from art to more personal matters. You mentioned it was a difficult time for you, Sebastian said gently, his blue eyes holding hers. You don't have to talk about it, but I want you to know that I'm a good listener. And so she told him. She didn't mean to, but it all came pouring out. The lies, the spar in Aspen, the other woman, the crushing humiliation. She spoke with a raw honesty she hadn't even been able to access with her sister. Sebastian listened without interruption, his expression a mixture of empathy and a slow-burning anger on her behalf. When she finished, her voice choked with emotion. He reached across the table and covered her hand with his. His touch was firm, grounding. Chloe, he said, his voice low and serious. No one deserves to be treated like that. What he did is unforgivable. He paused, choosing his next words carefully. I have to be honest with you. My interest in Marcus Thorne wasn't purely academic. Chloe looked at him, confused. My venture capital division was approached by Innovate for their Series B funding. A few months ago, he explained. We did our due diligence. We looked into the company, the financials, and the man. A cold feeling crept up Chloe's spine. And, and we passed, Sebastian said, his gaze unwavering. The numbers were inflated, the projections were unrealistic, and there were inconsistencies, rumors of cut corners and a toxic work environment. But more than that, I had a meeting with him. I didn't like his character. He struck me as a man who would build his empire on a foundation of sand, willing to sacrifice anything and anyone to get to the top. He gave her hand a gentle squeeze. I am so incredibly sorry that you were the one he chose to sacrifice. The validation was so powerful, it felt like a physical force. It wasn't just her pain, her intuition. A man like Sebastian Davenport, a man whose entire reputation was built on integrity, had seen the same flaws in Marcus that she had been trying to ignore for years. She hadn't been blind or stupid. She had been loyal to a man who was unworthy of it. Their parallel worlds were beginning to converge. While Marcus's fantasy in Aspen was starting to fray at the edges, Chloe's reality, in San Francisco, was solidifying. She was standing on the firm ground of truth, supported by family, and now by the unexpected profound connection with a man who saw her, valued her, and confirmed that the fault was not in her, but in the man she had promised to love. The future was still uncertain, but for the first time it didn't feel empty. It felt like a blank canvas, and she was finally ready to be the artist of her own life. The return flight to Los Angeles was a journey into the storm. Chloe's time in San Francisco had been a balm, a period of healing and rediscovery, cocooned by the love of her family and the startlingly gentle presence of Sebastian. He had called her every day since their museum visit, their conversations meandering for hours, building an intimacy that felt more real than anything she had ever shared with Marcus. She was returning not as a victim, but as a woman who had reclaimed her own narrative. She knew a confrontation was inevitable, and for the first time she wasn't afraid. Amelia had insisted on flying back with her, a silent, formidable bodyguard in a power suit. I'm not letting you walk into that viper's nest alone, she had stated, and Chloe had been too grateful to argue. As they deplaned at LAX, Chloe's phone buzzed. It was a text from a number she didn't recognize. Unknown. He's on AA flight 2451 from Denver. Denver landing at gate 42B in 20 minutes. Thought you should know. You deserve better. Chloe stared at the message, her blood running cold. Denver, not Aspen. Of course. He would use a major hub to cover his tracks. But who had sent the message? A disgruntled employee? A friend of a friend? It didn't matter. It was a gift. A piece of leverage. Change of plans, Chloe said to Amelia, her voice steady, a newfound steel in her tone. We're going to gate 42B. Amelia's eyes lit up with a predatory gleam. Oh, this is going to be good. They found a coffee shop with a clear view of the gate and waited. The 20 minutes felt like an eternity. Chloe's heart hammered against her ribs, not with fear, but with a strange, exhilarating adrenaline. This would not be a screaming match. It would be a quiet surgical removal of Marcus Thorne from her life. And then she saw them. Marcus and Isabella emerged from the jet bridge, looking for all the world like a chic, successful couple returning from a romantic getaway. He was laughing at something she said, his arm draped casually around her shoulders. Isabella was radiant, basking in the glow of their stolen weekend, her hand resting possessively on his lower back. They looked so comfortable, so entitled, so completely oblivious. The sight of them together in the flesh was a physical blow, but Chloe didn't flinch. She watched as they stopped to kiss, a long, lingering kiss, full of a shared secret. That was the moment Chloe chose to move. With Amelia at her side, she walked calmly towards them. She stopped a few feet away, simply standing there, waiting. It was Isabella who saw her first. Her smug smile vanished, replaced by a mask of pure horrified shock. Her face went pale. She instinctively dropped her hand from Marcus's back and took a half step away from him, as if proximity to him had suddenly become toxic. Marcus, sensing Isabella's sudden tension, followed her gaze. When his eyes landed on Chloe, his face went through a rapid, ugly series of transformations. Confusion, then dawning horror, and finally a pathetic cornered panic. His jaw went slack. The color drained from his face. "Chloe!" He stammered, his voice a choked whisper. He automatically took his arm from around Isabella, his hands fluttering uselessly at his sides. What are you doing here? I thought you were at home." "Clearly," Chloe said, her voice astoundingly calm and clear. It didn't tremble. It didn't break. It was the voice of a woman who had nothing left to lose and everything to gain. She held his gaze, letting the full weight of his betrayal hang in the air between them. Her presence, her stillness, her visible pregnancy. It was a more powerful indictment than any shouted accusation could ever be. It's not what it looks like." He fumbled the classic, pathetic refrain of the guilty. Chloe almost laughed. She gestured slightly towards the still frozen Isabella. "It looks like you enjoyed your business trip to New York," she said, her voice dripping with ice. "Or was it Aspen or Denver? It's so hard to keep track of your lies." Marcus looked frantically between the two women, his mask of confident CEO crumbling to reveal the weak, deceitful man beneath. "Isabella is just a colleague. There was a conference." Isabella, who had been silent until now, let out a short, bitter laugh. "A conference? You told me you were leaving her. You told me we were celebrating our future." She looked at Marcus with utter contempt, realizing in that instant that she was just as much a pawn in his game as the woman she had helped him betray. "Shut up, Isabella," Marcus hissed, his panic turning to anger. "Don't you dare speak to her that way," Chloe said, her voice sharp and commanding. She looked at Isabella, not with hatred, but with a flicker of something that looked almost like pity. "He told you whatever you wanted to hear. That's what he does. He builds worlds out of lies. You should get out while you still can." With that, Chloe turned her back on Isabella and focused her full undivided attention on her husband. "I went home for a few things," she said, her voice dropping to a lower, more intimate and far more terrifying tone. "I left my rings on top of the baby monitor you sent. Consider them my severance package. My lawyer will be in touch with yours. We have nothing further to discuss." She looked at him one last time, at the pathetic, crumbling facade of the man she had once loved. She felt nothing, no anger, no sadness, just a profound, liberating emptiness. He had no more power over her. She turned to leave. "Chloe." "Wait," Marcus called out, desperation cracking his voice. "We can talk about this. Don't do this. Think about the baby." Chloe stopped, but she didn't turn around. "Oh, she said, her voice carrying back to him, clear and final. "I am thinking about my baby, and he deserves a father who understands the meaning of truth and integrity. He deserves better than you." And with that, she and Amelia walked away, leaving Marcus standing alone in the middle of the terminal, caught between the woman he had betrayed and the woman he had used, his carefully constructed world shattered on the sterile floor of LAX. Walking away from him was the hardest and easiest thing she had ever done. Each step was a reclamation of her own life. By the time they reached the exit, a sense of profound peace had settled over her. The storm had passed. As they stepped out into the California sunshine, Chloe's phone rang. The name on the screen made her smile. "Sebastian," she answered, her voice warm. "You're back," he said. "How are you?" "I'm good," Chloe replied, and she was surprised to find that it was the absolute truth. "I'm really good." "I have some news," he said, a note of excitement in his voice. "There's a foundation I chair, one that provides grants to up-and-coming artists and curators. There's a director-level position opening up. It would mean moving to San Francisco, but I thought of you. I thought you'd be perfect for it." Chloe stopped walking, her breath catching in her throat. A job, a career, a new life, in a new city. It was everything she hadn't dared to dream of offered to her in a moment of perfect, beautiful serendipity. Sebastian, she whispered, tears welling in her eyes, but this time they were tears of overwhelming gratitude and hope. I don't know what to say. Say you'll think about it, he said gently. Say you'll let me take you to dinner to celebrate your new beginning. Chloe looked up at the vast, clear blue sky. A new dawn was breaking. I'd love that, she said, a brilliant, genuine smile spreading across her face. I would love that. Very much. In the end, this wasn't just a story about a cheating husband getting caught. It was about a woman, Chloe, who was pushed to her absolute limit and discovered a strength she never knew she had. She traded a life that glittered on the surface for one that was truly golden within. She found out that sometimes the most devastating betrayals can lead to the most beautiful destinations, not just a first-class seat on a plane, but a first-class life. She chose herself, she chose her son, and she opened her heart to a future built on respect, kindness, and genuine partnership. Her ex-husband was left with the ruins of his lies, a testament to the fact that character is the one thing money can't buy and deceit can't build. What did you think of Chloe's story? Have you ever seen someone turn a moment of crisis into a major life upgrade? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you were moved by her journey, don't forget to hit that like button, share this video with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe for more true life stories of drama, resilience, and ultimate triumph.
The diamond on Rosalind's finger felt heavier than a shackle, a cold, glittering reminder of the lie her life had become. To the world, she was the wife of Sterling Blackwood, a self-made tech millionaire who lived in a glass tower that scraped the New York sky. But within those silent, sterile walls, she was just a ghost in second-hand clothes. He called her his charity case, his little rustic project. Now, with their first child growing beneath her heart, his mockery had sharpened into a weapon. He didn't know the secret she guarded, a secret locked away in the annals of old money and dynastic power, a truth so vast it could swallow his new money empire whole, and not even register the meal. Tonight, at the annual Blackwood Foundation Gala, he planned to parade his poor, pregnant wife as a testament to his own magnanimity. He had no idea he wasn't hosting a party. He was orchestrating his own downfall. The penthouse on the 80th floor of One Vanderbilt was less a home and more a monument to Sterling Blackwood's ego. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a god's-eye view of Manhattan, a sprawling kingdom of light and ambition that Sterling believed he had conquered. Every surface was cold, hard, and impossibly clean. Italian marble, polished chrome, black lacquer. It was a space designed to be admired, not lived in, much like Rosalind Hayes felt she was. For 2 years, she had tried to breathe life into the sterile expanse. A hand-thrown pottery vase she'd bought at a street fair was relegated to a cleaning closet. A colourful, hand-knitted Afghan was deemed tacky and disappeared. Sterling wanted everything to reflect his brand, new, sharp, and relentlessly modern. Rosalind, with her soft-worn cardigans and preference for dog-eared paperbacks over sterile e-readers, was a glaring, organic flaw in his minimalist masterpiece. Their courtship had been a whirlwind. He'd been captivated by her quiet grace and genuine smile, a refreshing anomaly in a world of calculated connections. He'd called her his real girl. But as his company, Apex Financial Solutions, skyrocketed in value, his affection began to curdle into condescension. Her lack of pedigree, once a charming novelty, became an embarrassment. "Rosalind, for God's sake, what is that?" he'd asked one evening, his voice laced with the weary disdain he usually reserved for incompetent junior analysts. He was pointing at the simple, gold-filled locket around her neck. "It was my mother's," she answered softly, her hand instinctively covering the worn oval. "It looks like something you'd find in a cereal box," he sniffed, turning back to his tablet. "We're meeting Carter and Jessica Vance for dinner at Per Se tonight. I'll have my assistant send over something from Tiffany's. Try not to look like you just wandered in from a farm in Ohio." She wasn't from a farm. She was from a quiet, tree-lined street in a forgotten corner of Connecticut, raised by a single mother who had valued books over bank balances. That was the story she had told him, and it was true as far as it went. She'd just omitted the part about the street being the service entrance to a sprawling 20-acre estate, and the books being first editions bound in Moroccan leather. The cruelty had escalated when she told him she was pregnant. She had hoped the news would mend the growing chasm between them, that the prospect of a family would rekindle the warmth he'd once shown. Instead, it had given him a new angle for his mockery. "My heir," he'd declared, a smirk playing on his lips as he surveyed her in the morning light. "Let's just hope the baby inherits my ambition, and not your simple sensibilities. We can't have a Blackwood scion thinking a trip to the public library is a major cultural event." Tonight was the Blackwood Foundation Gala, the pinnacle of Sterling's social calendar. It was an extravagant affair designed to cement his status among New York's philanthropic elite, and he had a special role for Rosalind. He found her in their cavernous walk-in closet, staring at the dress he had chosen for her. It was a sheath of shimmering, silver fabric by a designer whose name was spoken in hushed, reverent tones. It was beautiful, but it felt like a costume. "Perfect," he said, coming up behind her. His hands rested on her shoulders, but his touch was proprietary, not affectionate. "It'll hang on you beautifully. We need to accentuate your delicate state. It plays well." The magnanimous Sterling Blackwood, lifting his lovely, humble wife into the stratosphere. He gestured to a velvet box on the dresser. "And this." She opened it. Inside, nestled on a bed of white satin, was a diamond necklace so bright it hurt to look at. It wasn't a gift. It was a prop. It was a price tag he was hanging around her neck to show everyone how much she was worth to him. "Sterling, it's too much," she whispered. "Nonsense. It's an investment in our image." He paused, his gaze hardening, as he noticed the simple, thin gold band on her ring finger, her actual wedding ring, the one they'd picked out together in a small, dusty jewelry shop downtown before he became Sterling Blackwood. "You're not wearing that tonight. You'll wear the 10-carat rock I got you for our first anniversary, the one that actually looks like we can afford our life." Each word was a carefully placed stone, building a wall between them. She felt the familiar sting behind her eyes, the burn in her throat. She had held on to the hope that the man she married was still in there somewhere, buried beneath layers of arrogance and insecurity. "I was thinking," he continued, oblivious to her inner turmoil, "during my speech, I might talk a little about your background. Nothing too specific, of course. Just a touching little anecdote about how I found this diamond in the rough. It'll make the old money dinosaurs in the room feel generous when they write their checks. People love a good rags-to-riches story." He wasn't talking about his own story. He was talking about hers. He was going to paint a picture of her as a penniless waif he had rescued from obscurity, and he expected her to stand there, pregnant with his child, and smile gratefully. A quiet, cold resolve began to form in the pit of her stomach. She had endured the private snubs, the backhanded compliments, the slow erosion of her identity. She had told herself it was for the sake of their marriage, and now for the sake of their child. But to be publicly humiliated, to have her carefully constructed, private life turned into a cheap marketing ploy. That was a line she didn't know he would cross. "Don't look so morose, darling," he said, kissing the top of her head with a chilling lack of warmth. "This is a celebration, our celebration. Tonight, everyone will see just how lucky you are to be Mrs. Blackwood." As he walked away, Rosalind looked at her reflection in the mirror. The pale, tired woman staring back was a stranger, but deep within her eyes, a flicker of something else was igniting. It was the dormant fire of a lineage she had long since abandoned. The Vanderbilts were not known for their simplicity. They were known for building empires and crushing their enemies. Sterling Blackwood was about to learn that you can take the girl out of the dynasty, but you can't take the dynasty out of the girl. The days leading up to the gala were a masterclass in psychological warfare. Sterling, energized by the prospect of his grand performance, seemed to find new ways to underscore Rosalind's perceived inadequacies. He treated their shared life as a continuous project of refinement, with her as the unpolished primary subject. One afternoon, his mother, Beatrice Blackwood, came for tea. Beatrice was a woman who had clawed her way into society on the coattails of her late husband's modest manufacturing business, a fortune Sterling had leveraged and multiplied tenfold. She possessed all the snobbery of old money with none of its subtlety. "Rosalind, dear," Beatrice began, her eyes scanning the minimalist living room with approval. "Sterling tells me you're finally getting the hang of things. It must be so overwhelming for you." She picked up a decorative silver orb from the coffee table, polishing it with her thumb as if to remove some invisible smudge of poverty. "I'm managing just fine, Beatrice," Rosalind said, her voice even. She poured the tea, her hands steady. "Of course you are. You're a trooper." The compliment was delivered with the same inflection one might use for a well-behaved pet. "It's just, well, with the baby coming, standards are so important. We wouldn't want the child picking up any unrefined habits." Beatrice's gaze flickered pointedly toward Rosalind's simple flat shoes, tucked neatly by the sofa. Sterling, who had been observing from his armchair, chimed in. "Mother is right, Rosie. We need to start thinking about legacy. I was looking at preschools. There's a waiting list for the Dalton school that's 3 years long. We'll have to get our name on it now. I'll have to pull some strings, of course, given your lack of legacy connections." It was a conversation designed to exclude and diminish her. They spoke of her child as if it were a future commodity, a Blackwood asset whose value could be depreciated by her own history. She sat silently, the warmth from her teacup a small, inadequate comfort. Later that day, Sterling found her in the spare room she had hoped to turn into a nursery. She was unpacking a small wooden box, a collection of her most treasured possessions. Inside were faded photographs of her mother, a collection of sea glass they had gathered on a beach in Maine, and a worn copy of The Little Prince with her mother's handwritten notes in the margins. "What's all this junk?" Sterling asked from the doorway, his tone a familiar blend of curiosity and disgust. "They were my mother's," Rosalind said, her back to him. He picked up one of the smooth green pieces of sea glass. "You know, we could have a proper nursery designed. I saw a feature in Architectural Digest, fully automated crib, cashmere walls. We don't need it cluttered with sentiment." He tossed the piece of glass back into the box with a dismissive clink. That was the core of their disconnect. To him, things were valuable because of their price. To her, they were valuable because of their story. His entire identity was built on what he had acquired. Hers was built on what she had loved and lost. She had tried once, early in their marriage, to tell him the truth. They were lying in bed, the city lights a soft glow against the ceiling. Sterling, she had begun, her heart pounding. There's something about my family I haven't told you. He was scrolling through stock market futures on his phone. My mother's family. They're not simple people. There's a history, a rather complicated one. He put his phone down, a flicker of genuine interest in his eyes. Oh? Are you telling me you're descended from horse thieves? Don't worry, darling. I'm not a snob. Your past is your past. The comment, meant to be reassuring, was so patronizing, so utterly dismissive of the gravity of what she was trying to say, that the words died in her throat. He had already cast her in a role, and he wasn't interested in a revised script. He wanted her to be poor. It made his own story, the story of the great Sterling Blackwood, that much more heroic. To learn she came from anything other than abject poverty would spoil his narrative. So she had let it drop. The silence had been a small betrayal then. Now it felt like a catastrophic failure. The night before the gala, the pressure became unbearable. Sterling was rehearsing his speech in front of the living room's vast windows, using his reflection as an audience. And so, when I met Rosalind, he boomed, gesturing to an imaginary her. I saw a spirit untouched by the cynicism of our world. A woman of simple means, but with a wealth of character. He paused, turning to the real Rosalind, who was curled on the sofa. What do you think? Is simple means too on the nose? Or should I say, humble origins? Sterling, please don't, she said, her voice barely a whisper. Please don't talk about me in your speech. His face hardened. Why not? It's a wonderful story. It's our story. No, it's your story. It's a version of me you invented to make yourself look good. He scoffed, pacing the marble floor. Oh, I see. You're ashamed of where you come from. I'm trying to tell the world that it doesn't matter, that I love you despite it all, and you're throwing it back in my face. How ungrateful. Ungrateful? The word struck a nerve, sharp and painful. I'm not a project, Sterling. I'm your wife. I am the mother of your child. I am not a stepping stone for your social climbing. You knew who I was when you married me. He shot back, his voice rising. You knew what this world was like. Did you really think you could marry me and we'd spend our weekends tending a vegetable patch in some quaint cottage? This is the life. This is what I've built. And you are a part of the brand now. You need to start acting like it. He snatched the silver-framed photo from the side table. It was their wedding picture. They were smiling, and for a moment she could remember the feeling of his hand in hers, the genuine belief that their love could conquer anything. Look at you, he said, his voice dropping to a low, menacing tone. You were a nobody, a pretty face with nothing to your name. I gave you everything. This apartment, the clothes on your back, the food you eat, the diamonds I have to beg you to wear. I gave you a name. And tomorrow night, you will stand by my side, and you will smile, and you will look grateful for the incredible life I have provided. Do you understand me? He didn't wait for an answer. He slammed the photo back down, the glass cracking with a sharp retort that echoed in the silent, cavernous room. He stormed off toward their bedroom, leaving Rosalind alone with the fractured image of their marriage. She walked over and picked up the frame. A thin, spiderweb crack ran right between their smiling faces. It was a perfect metaphor. She traced the line with her finger. For months, she had been trying to hold the pieces together, to pretend the damage wasn't there. But the cracks were too deep. The entire structure was about to shatter. And as she stood there, with the weight of her past and the fear for her future pressing down on her, She knew she couldn't let him be the one to bring the whole thing crashing down in a public spectacle. If it was going to break, she would be the one to choose how. The ballroom at the plaza was a symphony of excess. Crystal chandeliers, weighing as much as small cars, dripped light onto a sea of tuxedos and designer gowns. The air hummed with the buzz of polite conversation, the clinking of champagne flutes, and the subtle, relentless thrum of power. Every person in the room was a player, a donor, a connection, and tonight, Sterling Blackwood was positioning himself to be king. Rosalind stood by his side, a silent, silver-clad satellite to his blazing sun. The diamond necklace felt like a brand on her skin, cold and heavy. She smiled when he touched the small of her back. She nodded when he introduced her to titans of industry and their immaculately preserved wives. Her name was mentioned, but their eyes slid past her, landing on her burgeoning belly and then back to Sterling, the man of the hour. She was an accessory, proof of his virility and his supposed depth of character. "Sterling, my boy, a magnificent event," boomed a portly man with a florid face, clapping Sterling on the shoulder. He was Robert Driscoll, a real estate mogul with a ruthless reputation. His eyes, small and sharp, flicked to Rosalind. "And this must be the lovely wife. He never stops talking about you." "Rosalind, this is Robert Driscoll." "Robert, my better half," Sterling said with a proprietary grin. "A pleasure," Rosalind said, extending a hand. Driscoll ignored it, his gaze fixed on Sterling. "Found yourself a real gem, eh, Blackwood? Down to earth. Keeps a man grounded." The exchange was a perfect microcosm of her experience. She was an object to be discussed, not a person to be engaged. The evening wore on in a blur of forced smiles and empty pleasantries. Beatrice Blackwood held court at a central table, accepting compliments on her son's success as if they were her own. Every time her gaze fell on Rosalind, it was with a look of critical assessment, a silent reminder to stand up straight, to smile wider, to be a better prop. Finally, the moment arrived. The lights dimmed slightly, and Sterling was introduced to a round of enthusiastic applause. He strode to the podium, basking in the spotlight. He was a natural performer, his voice confident and charismatic as he spoke about the Foundation's work, about empowering underprivileged youth, about giving back to the city that had given him so much. Rosalind watched from their table, a cold knot tightening in her stomach. She felt the baby kick, a small, insistent flutter, as if it, too, sensed the impending storm. "But my success is not my own," Sterling said, his voice softening, drawing the room in. "It is built on the support and inspiration of the people I love. Most importantly, my incredible wife, Rosalind." He gestured for her to stand. A spotlight found her, pinning her in its glare. Reluctantly, she rose, her hands clasped in front of her. The applause felt like a wave of heat, suffocating her. "Now, many of you in this room were born into a world of comfort and privilege," Sterling continued, his eyes sweeping across the audience of heirs and CEOs. "I was not. I built my company from nothing, and Rosalind comes from an even humbler place than I do." A murmur rippled through the crowd. This was not the standard, bland spousal tribute. This was something different. It was intimate, and it was cruel. When I met her, she was a waitress, working double shifts to make ends meet, with a spirit that shone brighter than any of the jewels in this room tonight. This was a complete fabrication. She had been working part-time at a quiet bookstore cafe while finishing her art history degree at Columbia, a degree her grandfather had grudgingly funded. But the fiction was better for his story. A waitress was so much more romantically destitute. I fell in love with a woman who had nothing but the clothes on her back and a heart full of gold," he went on, his voice thick with faux emotion. "She reminds me every day what truly matters. She is my touchstone to reality, my constant reminder of the world outside our gilded cages." He paused, letting the weight of his manufactured sentiment settle over the room. People were dabbing their eyes. Beatrice was beaming with pride. They were all lapping it up. They saw a great man, a benevolent king who had plucked a commoner from obscurity and elevated her to his side. They didn't see the truth. They didn't see the constant belittling, the chipping away of her self-worth, the slow, agonizing death of their love. They saw a fairy tale. She was living in a horror story. "So tonight, as you consider your donations," Sterling concluded, his eyes finding hers across the room, "I want you to think of Rosalind. Think of the potential that lies hidden in every corner of this city, waiting for a chance. She is my greatest investment. And now, carrying our first child, she is the embodiment of the future we are all trying to build." He raised his glass. "To my wife, Rosalind. My beautiful, perfect charity case." The room erupted in applause. The final 2 words, delivered with a loving smile, were for her alone. A secret, vicious little twist of the knife. Charity case. Something inside Rosalind broke. It wasn't a loud, dramatic snap, but a quiet, clean fracture. The tears that welled in her eyes were not of gratitude or pride. They were glass tears, sharp and cold. She did not let them fall. She held the gaze of her husband, the stranger on the stage, and for the first time, she did not try to hide the pain in her eyes. She let him see it. She let him see the ruin he had made. For a fleeting second, a flicker of something, shock, guilt, crossed his face. But it was gone as quickly as it came, replaced by the triumphant smile of a man who had just conquered the world. She sat down, her movements stiff and robotic. She endured the rest of the dinner, the fawning congratulations, the pats on her shoulder. She was a statue, a perfect model of the grateful wife. But inside she was already gone. She was packing a mental suitcase, walking out a mental door. When they finally returned to the sterile silence of the penthouse, Sterling was euphoric. "Did you see their faces, Rosie? They loved it. Driscoll pledged $500,000. We're the new power couple in this city." He loosened his bow tie, energized and triumphant. "You were perfect, the perfect picture of grace." Rosalind walked past him into the bedroom. She began to remove the jewelry, piece by piece, the heavy earrings, the glittering bracelet. Finally, the necklace. She laid it on his dresser, the diamonds winking coldly under the halogen lights. "You called me your charity case," she said, her voice flat, devoid of emotion. He had the grace to look momentarily abashed. "Oh, that. It was just a turn of phrase, darling. A little flourish for the story." "It wasn't a story, Sterling. It was my life. And you sold it for applause." She turned to face him, and he finally saw that the woman who had been standing by his side all night was gone. In her place was someone he didn't recognize, someone with eyes as hard and unyielding as the diamonds he so admired. "I'm leaving," she said. He laughed, a short, incredulous bark. "Leaving? Don't be so dramatic. Where would you go? Back to waiting tables? You have nothing, Rosalind. Everything you are is because of me." "That," she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper, "is where you are profoundly mistaken." She walked to the closet, not to her side with its designer gowns, but to the back, where a single, worn canvas duffel bag was stored, the bag she'd arrived with 2 years ago. He watched, a mixture of amusement and irritation on his face, as she pulled it out. This was a tantrum, he thought. A little hormonal outburst. She would pack a few things, he would let her stew for an hour, and then he would graciously forgive her. But she didn't pack the clothes he'd bought her. She packed her worn paperbacks, the small wooden box of her mother's things, a few simple sweaters. She took off the 10-carat diamond ring and placed it next to the necklace. She slid her simple gold wedding band back onto her finger. When she was done, she walked to the door, the duffel bag slung over her shoulder. "This is insane, Rosalind," he said, his voice finally losing its cocky edge. "You can't just walk out. You're pregnant with my child." "I am pregnant with my child," she corrected him, her hand resting on her belly. "And I will not raise them in a house where their mother is seen as a project, a prop, or a charity case." She opened the door and walked out into the hallway without a backward glance. The heavy door clicked shut behind her, the sound as final as a gavel. Sterling Blackwood stood alone, in his monument to himself, utterly bewildered. He was the king of the world, and his queen had just abdicated. The taxi ride from the gleaming spire of One Vanderbilt to a fourth-floor walk-up in the West Village felt like a journey between planets. Rosalind stared out the window, the glittering lights of the city blurring into abstract streaks. The adrenaline that had propelled her out of the penthouse was beginning to fade, leaving behind a deep, trembling exhaustion. She paid the driver with the last $80 she had in her wallet, a small emergency stash she kept hidden from Sterling. She climbed the creaking stairs to apartment 4B, her duffel bag feeling heavier with each step. She knocked softly. The door swung open to reveal her oldest friend, Penelope Penny Jones, a whirlwind of curly red hair, paint-splattered overalls and worried eyes. "Rosie, my God, I got your text. Get in here." Penny pulled her into a fierce hug that smelled of turpentine and chamomile tea. Penny's apartment was the antithesis of the penthouse. It was small, warm, and chaotic. Books were stacked on every available surface, canvases leaned against the walls, and a fat ginger cat named Marmalade blinked lazily from a pile of cushions. It was a home. Rosalind felt the tension in her shoulders release for the first time in years. The glass tears she had held back all night finally fell, hot and silent. "He called me his charity case," she whispered into Penny's shoulder, "in front of 1,000 people." "That man," Penny said, her voice a low growl, "is a walking, talking, vacant lot with a view." "I never liked him." She guided Rosalind to a well-worn sofa, pushed the cat aside, and wrapped a quilt around her. "Tea. And then you tell me everything." As Penny bustled in the tiny kitchen, Rosalind looked around the apartment. On the wall was a framed photograph of the two of them in college, bright-eyed and full of dreams, long before Sterling Blackwood and the weight of his world had entered her life. It felt like a picture of a different person. Over steaming mugs of tea, she recounted the entire evening, the words tumbling out of her in a rush of pain and anger. Penny listened, her expression hardening with every detail. "So that's it? You're done?" Penny asked when she'd finished. "I'm done," Rosalind confirmed. The words felt solid, real. "I can't bring a baby into that. I don't want my child to think that love is conditional, that a person's worth is measured by their net worth." "Good," Penny said firmly. "You can stay here as long as you need. We'll figure it out. You can get a job. I can sell a few more paintings. We'll manage." Rosalind smiled, a true, grateful smile. "Thank you, Penny. I knew I could count on you." "Always," Penny said. Then her expression grew serious. "So, are you going to make the call?" Rosalind knew exactly what she meant. The call she hadn't made in over 5 years. The call to a number she knew by heart. The number for the main office at the Vanderbilt estate in Greenwich, Connecticut. Her estrangement from her grandfather Cornelius Vanderbilt, was a wound as deep as the one Sterling had inflicted. Cornelius was a man forged in the crucible of old-world industry and finance. He saw the world in terms of assets, legacies, and strategic alliances. When Rosalind, his only grandchild and heir apparent, had announced her intention to study art history instead of corporate law, he had been displeased. When she had fallen in love with and decided to marry the then up-and-coming, but pedigree-less, Sterling Blackwood, he had been furious. "He is a flash in the pan," Cornelius had thundered, his voice echoing in the cavernous library of the estate. "A self-obsessed peacock with no foundation. Our name, our legacy, has been built over a century. You will not throw it away on some digital charlatan." "I love him, Grandpa," she had pleaded. "Love is a luxury," he had retorted. "Duty is a requirement. You choose him. You choose his world. You will have no part of mine." He had cut her off, not just financially, that she could handle, but emotionally. He had refused to take her calls, returned her letters unopened. Her inheritance, the vast fortune of Vanderbilt Global Holdings, was to be redirected to a charitable trust upon his death. She had been disowned. And so, she had built a new life, a simple one, pretending the Vanderbilt name meant nothing to her. Now, pregnant and alone, with less than $100 to her name, the world her grandfather represented was her only remaining lifeline. Not for the money, but for the safety, the security it could provide for her child. She took a deep breath. "I have to." Penny handed her the phone. Rosalind's fingers trembled as she dialed the familiar number. It was late, but she knew someone would answer. The Vanderbilt estate never truly slept. A crisp, familiar voice answered on the second ring. "Vanderbilt residence." "Abernathy? Is that you?" There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Miss Rosalind?" The voice of Arthur Abernathy, her grandfather's lifelong solicitor and confidant, was filled with disbelief. "Yes, Arthur, it's me." "My dear child, are you all right? The master has been—" He trailed off, his professional composure faltering. "I'm fine, Arthur. I need to speak with him." "Is he there?" Another pause, this one longer, heavier. "Miss Rosalind, there is something you need to know. Your grandfather is unwell, very unwell. He has been asking for you." The floor seemed to drop out from under her. All the anger and resentment she held for her grandfather evaporated, replaced by a cold dread. "What do you mean, unwell? How long?" "He was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer 6 months ago. It is advanced. He didn't want you to be told. He said it would look like he was trying to manipulate you with sentiment." 6 months. While she had been living in her gilded cage, enduring Sterling's cruelty, her grandfather had been dying. The stubborn pride of 2 Vanderbilts had cost them precious time. "Arthur," she said, her voice thick with emotion, "I need to see him." "He is weak, but he is lucid. He has been putting his affairs in order," Abernathy said. "In fact, I was instructed to contact you this week. It seems you have made my task easier. There are significant developments regarding the estate and the Vanderbilt Global Charter, developments that directly concern you." Abernathy's tone was formal and weighted with meaning. This was more than a deathbed reconciliation. This was business. "Can you come to my office tomorrow morning, 10 o'clock?" he asked. 45 Rockefeller Plaza. "I'll be there," she said, her mind reeling. She hung up the phone, the news of her grandfather's illness crashing over her. He was dying. He had been asking for her, and there were developments. Penny put a comforting hand on her arm. "What is it?" My grandfather is sick, Rosalind said, her eyes distant. He's dying. And something else is happening. Abernathy wants to see me tomorrow. She looked down at her hands, at the simple gold band on her finger. She had run from one world of power and expectation into the arms of a man who created his own toxic version of it. She had tried so hard to be just Rosalind Hayes, a simple woman living a simple life. But she wasn't. She was Rosalind Vanderbilt Hayes, and it seemed her past was not just catching up with her. It was about to collide with her present with the force of a freight train. Sterling Blackwood woke the next morning to two things: the deafening silence of the penthouse and a raging hangover. For a moment, he expected to see Rosalind beside him, a placid look on her face, ready to absorb his inevitable apology and move on. The empty space in the bed was a cold, stark reality check. He called her phone. It went straight to voicemail. He sent a text. "Rosie, this is ridiculous. Come home, we'll talk." No reply. He sent another. An hour later. "Fine, be stubborn. You'll realize you can't survive without me." Silence. He went to his office, a sleek, glass-walled corner of the 60th floor of his own building. He expected to feel powerful, in control. Instead, the triumph of the previous night felt hollow, curdled. He couldn't focus on the market analytics streaming across his multiple monitors. His mind kept replaying the look in Rosalind's eyes just before she'd walked out. It wasn't anger. It was finality. His assistant, a hyper-efficient young woman named Claire, knocked on his door. "Mr. Blackwood, page 6 is on line 1. They have some questions about last night's gala." "Put them through," he said, straightening his tie. This was his element. Public relations. "Sterling, Jack from page 6, a slick voice said. "Heard the gala was a smashing success, but we're also hearing some whispers that your lovely wife made a rather hasty exit. Any trouble in paradise?" Sterling's blood ran cold. How could they know already? "Don't be absurd, Jack," he said, forcing a laugh. "Rosalind was just feeling a bit faint. The pregnancy, you know, all the excitement. I sent her home to rest. She's the most important thing to me." It was a plausible lie, and Jack seemed to buy it, for now, but the call was a warning shot. The perfect facade he had so carefully constructed was showing cracks. A pregnant wife leaving a gala early was one thing. A pregnant wife leaving her husband was a scandal. By midday, his anxiety was a frantic buzzing beneath his skin. He called Beatrice. "She actually left?" his mother shrieked, her voice a piercing needle over the phone. "Sterling, you have to fix this. Think of our reputation. What will people say?" "I'm trying, Mother," he snapped. "She's not answering her phone." Well, where could she have gone? Does she have any friends? That dreadful artist girl with the messy hair. Penny, of course. He found her number in Rosalind's old contacts list, which was still synced to the family cloud account. He dialed, his thumb jabbing at the screen. Penny answered on the first ring. "What do you want, Sterling?" "Is she with you?" he demanded, bypassing any pleasantries. "Even if she were, why on earth would I tell you?" Penny's voice was dripping with contempt. "Listen to me, you little bohemian nobody," he snarled, his patience gone. "This is a private matter between my wife and me. Put her on the phone right now." "No," Penny said simply. "And if you ever call this number again, or show up at my door, I'll get a restraining order so fast it'll make your stock price drop. Goodbye, Sterling." She hung up. He slammed his phone down on the desk, a surge of impotent rage washing over him. He was Sterling Blackwood. People didn't hang up on him. Wives didn't walk out on him. The world revolved around him, or it was supposed to. The afternoon brought more trouble. A call from Robert Driscoll, the real estate mogul. "Sterling, Driscoll began, his jovial tone from the gala gone, replaced by a cool professionalism. My finance team is reviewing the pledge we discussed. There's some concern. The stability of a man's home life often reflects the stability of his business practices. We're going to hold off on transferring the funds for now, just until the dust settles. It was a veiled message, but the meaning was clear. The whispers were getting louder. His image as the stable, magnanimous family man was a key part of his brand. Without Rosalind by his side, the brand was tarnished. Desperation began to set in. He drove home, the penthouse feeling less like a castle and more like a prison. He walked into their closet and saw her side, half empty. The designer gowns and shoes he'd bought her were still there. She had only taken the simple, inexpensive things she'd arrived with. It was an insult, a calculated rejection of everything he had given her. He saw the cracked picture frame on the bedside table. He picked it up. He had done this. His stupid, arrogant speech, his desire to turn her into a character in his own play, had driven her away. A flicker of genuine remorse sparked within him, but it was quickly extinguished by his ego. She would be back. She had to come back. What other choice did she have? She had no money, no connections, no power. He had it all. It was just a matter of time. He would win her back with a grand gesture. He'd buy her a new car, a private island. He would apologize, of course, but from a position of power. He would be the benevolent husband, forgiving his hysterical, pregnant wife for her outburst. He began to plan his strategy, his mind shifting back to the familiar comfort of tactics and leverage. He saw this not as a crisis of love, but as a hostile negotiation. And Sterling Blackwood never lost a negotiation. He was so engrossed in his own comeback narrative that he didn't notice the black town car that had been parked across the street from his building all afternoon, its occupant watching the entrance with patient, observant eyes. He didn't know that while he was plotting to reclaim his asset, the game had already changed. The board had been flipped, and he wasn't even a player anymore. He was just an obstacle about to be removed. The offices of Abernathy, Finch, and Lowell occupied the entire 50th floor of 45 Rockefeller Plaza. It was a world away from the cold modernity of Sterling's domain. Here, the walls were panelled in dark mahogany, the air smelled of old leather and lemon polish, and the silence was deep and respectful. It was the quiet, unshakable sanctuary of old money. Rosalind, dressed in a simple black dress she'd borrowed from Penny, felt a strange sense of homecoming. This was the world she had run from, but its customs were etched into her bones. Arthur Abernathy greeted her himself. He was a tall, slender man in his late 70s, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed spectacles and a demeanor of unwavering calm. He had known her since she was a child. "Miss Rosalind," he said, his voice warm. "It is a great relief to see you." He led her into a large, book-lined conference room with a sweeping view of St. Patrick's Cathedral. A thick file, bound in blue leather, sat in the center of the polished table. "Please sit," he said gently. "Would you care for some tea? Water?" "Water would be lovely. Thank you, Arthur." As he poured her a glass from a crystal carafe, she got straight to the point. "How is he?" Abernathy's face fell. "The doctors have given him weeks, perhaps a month. He is comfortable at the estate. He refuses to go to a hospital." Rosalind closed her eyes, absorbing the finality of it. "He asked for me." "Constantly," Abernathy confirmed. "His pride is a formidable thing, my dear, but his love for you is stronger. He regrets the lost yours more than you can know." He slid the blue file across the table toward her. "Which brings us to this. Your grandfather has spent the last few months making, radical changes to his estate planning, and the controlling charter of Vanderbilt Global Holdings. He opened the file. The documents inside were dense with legal terminology, but Abernathy guided her through them with practiced ease. As you know, upon your marriage, your grandfather amended his will to leave the entirety of his estate to the Vanderbilt Foundation, he began. 5 days ago, he signed a new last will and testament. It revokes all previous versions. He turned a page, revealing the signature block. Cornelius Vanderbilt's signature, once a bold, authoritative scrawl, was now shaky and thin. But it was unmistakably his. The new will names you, Rosalind Vanderbilt Hayes, as the sole beneficiary of his entire personal fortune, the properties, the art collections, the trusts, an estimated value of approximately $3 billion. Rosalind felt the air leave her lungs. It was an incomprehensible sum, a number with no basis in reality. But Abernathy wasn't finished. That, however, is the smaller part of the matter, he said, his expression grave. He tapped the thickest document in the file. This is the charter for Vanderbilt Global Holdings. It is one of the largest privately held conglomerates in the world, with interests in shipping, real estate, and technology. Its value is difficult to calculate precisely, but a conservative estimate would be north of $15 billion. He let that number hang in the air. Sterling's entire empire, the source of all his pride and arrogance, was a fraction of this. A rounding error. The charter had a complex succession plan involving a board of trustees, Abernathy continued. Your grandfather has invoked a little-known dynastic succession clause, which required the unanimous consent of the current board, a consent he has secured. Upon his passing, controlling interest and the position of chairman of the board of Vanderbilt Global Holdings will pass directly to you. Rosalind stared at him, speechless. It wasn't just an inheritance. It was an empire, a throne. Why? She finally whispered. After all these years. Why? He told me, Abernathy said, his gaze direct and compassionate, that he spent 5 years trying to protect his legacy from you. And he has spent the last 6 months realizing that his only true legacy is you. He made a mistake, a terrible, prideful mistake. This is his attempt, however late, to rectify it. He slid a final document from the file. It was a pre-signed, notarized petition for divorce. There is one more thing, Abernathy said, his voice dropping. We have been monitoring your husband. My grandfather hired private investigators months ago. He wanted to know what kind of life you were living. They have compiled a comprehensive dossier. He gestured to another, even thicker file on the credenza. His financial overextensions, his questionable business dealings, and his treatment of you. It is all there. Your grandfather referred to Mr. Blackwood as a house of cards in a hurricane. Rosalind felt a chill run down her spine. While she had felt alone and powerless, her grandfather, from a distance, had been watching over her, gathering weapons for a war she didn't even know she could fight. This petition names you as the plaintiff, citing irreconcilable differences. I have also taken the liberty of drafting the terms of a settlement. We will not be asking for alimony. We will be offering him a one-time, sealed payment of $5 million, contingent on the signing of a permanent, unbreakable non-disclosure agreement. He is to never speak your name, or the Vanderbilt name, in public or private, for the rest of his life. It was ruthless. It was brilliant. It was pure Cornelius Vanderbilt. He wasn't just facilitating a divorce. He was buying Sterling's silence, erasing him from her life as cleanly and efficiently as a surgeon excising a tumor. Should he refuse, Abernathy added calmly, the contents of that dossier will be anonymously leaked to the Wall Street Journal and the SEC. I do not believe he will refuse. Rosalind looked down at the documents, at the vast, world-altering power laid out before her. Yesterday, she had been a penniless, pregnant woman running from an emotionally abusive husband. Today, she was one of the wealthiest and most powerful women in the world. She thought of Sterling's smug, triumphant face at the gala. She thought of him calling her his charity case. The irony was so profound it was almost painful. He, who had mocked her for having nothing, had built his entire kingdom on a foundation of debt and bravado, and she, the simple girl he had pitied, was the secret heir to a fortune that could crush him without a second thought. Her hand went to her belly. This wasn't about revenge. Revenge was a small, petty emotion. This was about justice. This was about protecting her child, about building a future free from the shadow of a man like Sterling Blackwood. This was about reclaiming her name, her identity, and her power. She picked up a heavy, gold-plated pen from the desk. "Where do I sign?" she asked, her voice clear and steady, the voice of a Vanderbilt. The meeting was held in the neutral territory of Arthur Abernathy's mahogany-panelled conference room. Sterling arrived first, pacing with the impatient arrogance of a man who believed he was there to accept a surrender. He likely imagined a tearful, destitute Rosalind, begging to be taken back. He was unprepared for the woman who entered. Flanked by Abernathy, she was not the timid wife he had tormented, but a figure of serene, unshakable calm. Dressed in an elegant navy dress that bespoke quiet power, she met his gaze without a flicker of fear. "Rosalind," Sterling began, attempting a placating tone. "This has gone on long enough. Let's go home." "Please have a seat, Mr. Blackwood," Abernathy interjected, his voice coolly formal. Sterling sat, thrown off balance. "What is this?" he sneered at Rosalind. "Are you trying to sue me? You can't afford a firm like this, darling." "Mr. Abernathy is my family's legal counsel," she said, her voice steady. "He is here to present the terms of our divorce." Sterling laughed until Abernathy slid a document across the table. His smirk vanished as his eyes fell upon the plaintiff's name. Rosalind Vanderbilt Hayes. He looked from the paper to her, his face paling. "Vanderbilt, what kind of joke is this?" "It's no joke," Rosalind said quietly. "My grandfather is Cornelius Vanderbilt." The name landed with the force of a physical blow, shattering Sterling's entire reality. He was a minnow who had been mocking a leviathan. You lied to me," he stammered. "I omitted," she corrected. "I wanted to be loved for who I was. You saw a project, a charity case." Her use of his own cruel words struck him dumb. As if on cue, Abernathy tapped a second, thicker file. "This dossier details your company's financial irregularities, Mr. Blackwood. The SEC would find it very compelling." Sterling was trapped. Rosalind laid out the ultimatum with chilling precision. He would sign the divorce petition and a permanent NDA. In return for his silence, he would receive a settlement. He would then vanish from her life and the life of their child forever. "My child," he choked, a last desperate grasp for leverage. "Your heir," Rosalind's voice was ice. "The one you hoped wouldn't inherit my simple sensibilities? Do not worry. Our child will be raised as a Vanderbilt, free from your cruelty and shallow ambition. You will not be a part of their world." Defeated, the titan of industry crumbled. With a trembling hand, he signed his life away and walked out of the room, a ghost. Weeks later, Rosalind stood on the terrace of the Vanderbilt estate. She had reconciled with her grandfather before he passed, and he died knowing his legacy was in strong hands. Now the chairman of his global empire, she felt the baby kick. Sterling had tried to define her worth with diamonds and insults, never realizing her true power was a heritage she carried within. The poor wife was gone, and in her place stood a queen, ready to rule. Rosalind's story is a powerful reminder that our true worth is never defined by someone else's opinion or by the price tag they try to put on us. It's a fire that burns within, a legacy of strength that we carry in our spirit, whether we come from a palace or a quiet street. She endured the mockery and humiliation, believing her value was diminished, only to discover that she held an empire in her hands the entire time. Her journey wasn't just about inheriting a fortune, it was about inheriting her own power and self-worth. What did you think of Sterling's downfall? Was it justified? What would you have done in Rosalind's position? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you were moved by this story of justice and empowerment, please give this video a like and share it with someone who might need a reminder of their own inner strength. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss another story that makes you think, feel, and triumph.